What's going on, guys, and welcome back to the Wilson Auto Detailing community. Listen, in this video, we are going to be talking about doing paint correction outdoors in the sun and why this is such a touchy subject in the detailing world. So guys, listen, for context, as you guys can see, I am doing a actual pretty minimal, but it is a two-stage correction on this F350 before we apply a ceramic coating to it. And yes, I am actually outdoors. Now, just for a little bit more context, generally speaking, in my videos, you do see me in my detailing garage, and we've actually built out a completely new ceramic coating paint correction garage at this point. So all the recent videos you see, I am in my ceramic coating garage, and generally speaking, I understand why, of course, the garage is the number one thing that everyone wants to have in order to do these types of services. But why we want to touch on it in this video in terms of doing things outside is because if you are a mobile detailer, you are going to no doubt get really hung up by all of these opinions about not being able to do things outside, or if you do them outside, you're really irresponsible, or all of these sort of things. And mobile detailers want to introduce paint correction and ceramic coatings to their detailing businesses just like any other detailer would. But if you get caught up in all of the craziness in terms of what you're allowed to do, like it's illegal to do things outside or legal to do things outside, then you're going to feel really held back and really bogged down because it's like, okay, I don't know who to listen to. I don't know why I need to listen to them. So Luke, just give me an answer here. So let's talk about it coming from somebody who does paint correction inside and outside, mostly these days, of course, in my garage, but of course, in videos like this, you see I'm at the customer's house and I'm actually going to be forced in this mobile situation to do things outside. So let us together, one by one, go through the reasons why you quote-unquote cannot do things outside and why videos like this actually show specific situations, particularly for mobile detailers, where this is just not the case and you can actually let go of your deep anxiety about having to have a garage. So first things first, in the paint correction world, and let's just extend it to paint enhancement world as well, because many of you might not be doing paint correction or paint enhancement yet, but you want to get into that. And by the way, once this video is over, there are way more resources available to you below in the YouTube description box, specifically a free 5-part video series to teach you guys how you can break into the paint correction and ceramic coating game today and start not only learning those technical skills, but also actually making money selling it to your customer. You don't have to be certified. You don't have to spend a bunch of money. This is totally free to you to help you guys in your business. So in the paint correction world, one of the number one things that can kind of trip you up is simply, let's call it sanitation. And I don't mean sanitation in terms of like Germ-X and rubbing alcohol and keeping things sterile. I mean it in terms of the surface you're working on being clean, the pad you're working with being clean, and those sort of variables, because it's those kind of more boring variables like the cleanliness of your surface and pad that actually do have the capacity in some ways to mess you up at a higher level. And you'll think it's your pad, you'll think it's your polish, you'll think it's your skill. And it's actually something way more boring. It's just how clean is the area that you're working on, because as dust settles, as pollen settles, as random microscopic other things that we'll just call dust settles on the paint, it actually can affect relatively at a high level the type of correction or enhancement that you're able to do. It'll affect the way your polish works. It'll affect the way actually the finish on the paint ends up, because you can end up with things like DA haze and other, let's call them paint correction induced mistakes. And so this is one of the reasons why many people will say you do not do paint correction outside. There are too many uncontrollable dust variables, pollen variables, elemental variables that are going to affect your ability to actually get a good finish. Well, let's talk about in this particular situation for the mobile detailer where that can kind of be adapted. Well, here I am in this video in Middle Tennessee. I'm not working in the summertime. I'm not working in the springtime. I'm not working in the fall. This is kind of the end of winter timeline here. And because of that, this is basically the driest part of Middle Tennessee year. It's also the part where there's basically nothing exciting in the weather happening, meaning there's no pollen, it's not rainy, it's not humid, it's just dry and nothing is in the air. It's basically the only time of the year where this happens. So why does this serve to benefit me in this particular scenario? Well, it's because I don't have to worry about that at a high level. So for those of you who are mobile, the first thing to consider here is, number one, where you live, and number two, what time of year is it, let's say, more safe or less safe, or if you just live in a place where it's always safe, let's say like Southern California, to polish outside, then this is actually something you don't have to worry about so much. Now, as we're talking about the quote-unquote outside polishing and the weather variables, let's talk about what everybody seems to be talking about, which is heat. In the paint correction world, yes, there is some pretty good truth to the fact that heat is in some ways kind of our enemy. The reason is, and we won't go into this at a high level, but heat can tend to basically inhibit the level of correction you're able to produce in a given moment, but it can kind of mask some of the imperfections on the paint, making you think that you've got some really good correction done, only later to find out that you didn't. And there's a term for that. It's actually called dieback. Now, we're not going to go into that right now, but one of the things to consider in this particular scenario is, once again, the time of year that I'm actually polishing this paint. Remember, I said it's the end of winter. So what's the point? Well, outside in this video, it's probably about 45 degrees, but the sun is actually coming out from behind the clouds and it's shining on the paint. It actually puts the paint at more or less the perfect temperature for paint correction. And this is just kind of lucky because of, once again, the time of year. But the other thing, the third variable that I want to move into that affects things in terms of heat is, a lot of times in the detailing world, one of the reasons why, in addition to heat kind of being able to actually inhibit the type of correction you're able to do, one of the variables that nobody talks about is the polish itself. Heat can be generated in a greater degree when you're using solvent-based polishes, and there is actually water-based polishes out there, that two of them in particular that I will link in the YouTube description box below, that are kind of my foundational polishes that I use, that they can be used in the direct sun, and because there are zero solvents in them, they don't actually generate heat based on the chemical makeup of the polish. They're going to generate heat from the friction and the pad touching the paint, and of course the sun on the paint. But even if those polishes were to completely dry to a really thin crust on the paint because you're working in a hot environment, distilled water causes the entire crust to break down on the paint. You could literally spray distilled water on it and continue polishing even in the heat, and the polish is not going to generate any more of that. So that's just another little side note there. The polish itself that you're using contributes to really whether or not you'll be able to do things outside in a convenient way, number one, and number two, in a way where you get really good results. Now, the third comment I want to make about heat is this, and this is going to be a bit controversial. Yes, it is true. Heat is your enemy in the paint correction world. But the question is not always, is heat being introduced? Because, of course, heat is introduced at every single level. The question is there a threshold at which heat begins to become a problem? So I could look at this from a chemistry point of view, because that was what I studied in school. So when we look at it from kind of a atomic chemical point of view, you could think about activation energy. Activation energy, you learn what that is in chemistry 101 in high school, right? All it is the energy in a system that's required to actually cause a reaction to happen. So activation energy describes the threshold that actually has to be passed in terms of energy in order for a reaction to start, in order for it to actually begin. So what that means is, let's say it takes 100 units of energy to start a reaction and you only have 99 units. Well, even though you have 99 units of energy, the reaction isn't going to actually take place because you haven't passed the threshold for that to actually happen. So I would look at it in terms of this, because the fact of it is, clear coat these days is actually manufactured in, let's say, a much tougher way than people kind of realize. We're all kind of act like it's really this fragile thing. And yes, in some ways and in some perspectives, it is very fragile. But the point is, they actually use something called cross-linking. And then in addition to that, there's also this ceramic clear coat that exists, that's coming out more and more, that is even more durable than clear coats that used to exist when two-stage paint came around. And that's actually why we call it, some of the clear coats nowadays are actually kind of harder to correct, because they're these ceramic clears, and they're just more durable. So this is kind of a good, bad situation for detailers. But the point here that I'm trying to make is, even if heat is a problem, which it can become a problem, the question is how much heat is required in order for the problem to take place. And if it's 100 units of heat that is required, and again, I don't know even what I mean by units of heat, I'm just putting it in measurements so that we understand what I'm talking about here. If 100 units of heat is necessary to mess something up, and we're only introducing 99 units of heat, then as long as we don't pass that threshold, then we're going to be okay. And that's actually the point. In this particular situation, because of the weather, because of the nature of the sun, because of the nature of the time of the year, because of the nature of the color of the paint, all of this contributes to the fact that I don't have to worry about what's the heat that's being introduced here. And at most, like I said, let's circle back to the beginning, the biggest thing outdoors that we really need to worry about are those elemental weather factors like dust, pollen, rain sprinkling on the paint, or whatever it is, kind of those outdoor variables that we don't have as much control over. One of the ways to actually prevent that problem from becoming a problem as a mobile detailer is simply to have an air compressor that, after we've prepped the paint completely, we can blow every panel off and blow our pad off in between every single application of polish, so that anything that has settled on the paint minorly will be easily blown off by the air compressor. In addition to that, by the way, the other thing that really needs to be noted here is what kind of correction you're doing. While yes, we're doing a 2-stage correction on this truck, it's actually still not deep correction. We're just wanting to get 100% swirl removal, and we're dividing it into 2 steps because it's convenient and we're going to get the best gloss that way, but we're not doing crazy aggressive correction in this situation. And so even that contributes to the fact that I'm not worried about the fact that I'm doing it outside. Now guys, remember, if you want to break into the ceramic coating and paint correction game today, go below, grab my free 5-part video series that will take you from never touching a polisher or a coating to actually being able to do this on customer vehicles and making money doing it. As always, if you like this video and business sense in the detailing world like this, hit subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video.